They made one unforgettable mistake the moment they chose to cross me. Let me walk you through how a handful of HOA officials managed to turn my quiet, steady life into absolute chaos, only for me to reshape that chaos into a fully functioning cash flow machine. Yes, you heard that right. These geniuses put up a fence that completely blocked the only road leading to my ranch. Clearly, they'd never been introduced to the saying, "Never provoke a Texas rancher." And now, here I am, comfortably counting the steady stream of cash rolling in from the toll booth I built myself, while the HOA president scrambles to explain to his superiors why their entire budget evaporated. Before we dive into the madness, tell me, where are you watching this from? And if you've ever had a pleasant interaction with an HOA, drop that miracle in the comments. I doubt your story is wilder than what I'm about to reveal. My name is Ethan Morgan. I'm 38, I work remotely in business consulting, and I've been obsessed with electronics and DIY innovation since I was a kid. 2 years ago, I bought a 30-acre ranch outside Austin, Texas, a place where I could finally chase my dream of living independently and building things with my own hands. When I first took ownership, the place looked like it had survived a small apocalypse. Fields swallowed by weeds, a worn-out farmhouse that seemed to be held together by sheer stubbornness, and a barn that looked ready to collapse if the wind blew too hard. But where most people saw a hopeless fixer-upper, I saw opportunity. The soil was rich, the water rights were rock solid, and the location gave me the perfect balance, far enough from the city to stay peaceful, but close enough that supplies were never out of reach. I had always been drawn to technology. I spent my school years pulling apart gadgets and putting them back together, sometimes successfully, a broken bar, sometimes creating tiny, controlled explosions that my parents didn't appreciate. As I grew older, I taught myself programming and electronics, skills that became incredibly useful on the ranch. One of my early projects was an automated irrigation setup using soil moisture sensors and weather data, a system that delivered a huge harvest while saving tons of water. Then came the solar-powered chicken coop with doors that opened and closed with the sunrise and sunset, guarding the flock from predators. I even designed a sensor system for my goats, one that would alert me when a mother goat was close to giving birth by tracking her movement patterns. My ranch became both a sanctuary and a personal innovation lab. I grew vegetables, raised goats and chickens, and built custom tech solutions for nearly every chore. Local families often came by on weekends to buy fresh eggs and produce, and I rented out parts of the property for camping and small events. Everything was peaceful, everything worked. The road leading to my ranch had existed for over half a century and cut through a small patch of land overseen by the Golden Meadows Homeowners Association. Their neighborhood was about half a mile away, a row of upper-middle-class homes with perfect lawns and color-coordinated mailboxes. I wasn't an home member, but I had a legally recorded easement from the previous owner guaranteeing my right to use that road forever, no matter who owned or controlled the land. For 2 years, this arrangement worked flawlessly. I got along well with my neighbors, especially Frank and Eleanor Hamilton, an older couple who'd lived nearby for 3 decades. Frank, a retired engineer, often helped me with some of my more daring tech projects, while Eleanor frequently brought over her famous blueberry pies in exchange for fresh eggs. It was a perfect little ecosystem. Then one quiet Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I had just finished installing a new automated feeding system for my goats and was covered in hay and grease when I checked the mailbox. Inside was a certified letter that looked far too official for comfort. The wording inside felt deliberately cloudy, a corporate terminology twisted into something vague and suspicious. The letter spoke of an urgent meeting at the Golden Meadows Community Center to address illegal road usage and vote on security enhancement measures. I wasn't a home member. I had legal access. Nothing made sense. But instead of guessing, I decided to show up. I had no idea that attending that meeting would ignite a 6-month war and only one side would make it to the finish. The evening of the meeting arrived with a heavy spring storm. Rain hammered against my truck as I drove down the very road whose existence was now being questioned. I couldn't miss the irony. I parked my muddy pickups between 2 immaculate luxury SUVs and stepped inside. my boots leaving wet marks across the polished floor, earning a gallery of disapproving stares. About 20 residents sat neatly arranged in rows of folding chairs. Frank gave me a worried nod from across the room. Standing at the front was a tall man I'd never seen before, dressed in an expensive suit with flawless salt and pepper hair and shoes shining like mirrors. He wore the practiced smile of someone who spent their life convincing people to trust him, usually right before betraying that trust. A broken bar or maybe a polished car salesman, the kind whose smile never quite reaches his eyes. He introduced himself as Maxwell Bennett, the newly crowned HOA president, and he made sure everyone knew he had just moved in from Dallas with a highly successful real estate development career, something he mentioned with enough pride to fill the room. Standing beside him was Patricia Lawson, the home manager, wearing a permanent scowl that looked carved into her face. She held her tablet close to her chest like it contained top-secret government files. From the second she saw me, suspicion flashed in her eyes. Maxwell began the meeting by breezing through typical community updates: landscaping contracts, pool renovations, the annual summer barbecue. His voice was smooth, confident, a broken bar rehearsed. Then, as if he were merely shifting to another casual bullet point, he said the words that made my entire body tense: "Now, onto the ranch road situation." The casual tone he used, like my entire future was just another item after the pool repairs, made my jaw clench. I caught Frank shifting in his seat, uncomfortable. Maxwell straightened his ridiculously expensive tie and addressed the room with a booming sense of authority. "As many of you know, we're preparing to expand Golden Meadows onto the land adjacent to our community. Golden Meadows estates will increase property values by at least 30%. He clicked a remote and a glossy slideshow illuminated the wall of high-end homes with perfect gardens, sparkling pools, and manicured perfection. Phase 1, he announced proudly, will include 12 executive homes starting at $1.2 million, along with the private clubhouse and tennis courts exclusive to residents." A wave of impressed murmurs rippled through the room. Then came the punch. However, there was one obstacle: the unsightly ranch creating unnecessary traffic through our beautiful neighborhood. My vision almost went red. Hearing him drag my farm like it was some kind of disease ignited something inside me. Maxwell clicked to another slide, showing a massive stone gate, decorative columns, and an elaborate fence system. "This will improve security and raise property values. Construction begins tomorrow and will be finished in 3 days." That was it. I couldn't sit anymore. My chair scraped loudly across the floor as I stood. Every head turned toward me. "Excuse me," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady despite the heat in my chest. "I'm Ethan Morgan, the owner of that unsightly ranch. I have a legal, recorded easement granting me permanent access to that road. You can't just block a right-of-way without notice or discussion." The room went completely still. Maxwell's face shifted from surprise to irritation in a heartbeat. He clearly hadn't expected me to attend, much less speak. He plastered on a fake, condescending smile. "Mr. Morgan, perhaps you had an informal understanding before, but the HOA has full authority over community roads and security. Your operation is an eyesore that lowers property values. The board has unanimously approved the project." He gestured toward a group of people nodding obediently in the front row. "Of course, we're not unreasonable," he added smoothly. "You'll be able to purchase an access card for an annual fee of $300. Quite generous, given the improvements we're providing." My blood boiled. "This isn't an informal understanding," I said sharply. "It's on file with the county. It's legally binding. My farm existed long before this subdivision, and the road has been used for decades without issue." Maxwell never dropped his smile, but his eyes turned cold. "Well, times change, Mr. Morgan. Construction begins tomorrow. I suggest you apply for your access card to avoid problems." And just like that, he moved on, dismissing me like a minor inconvenience. After the meeting, I stepped into the parking lot, furious and soaked by the lingering rain dripping from the trees. The air was heavy, matching my mood. A man approached me cautiously, a George Miller, a long-time resident with kind eyes and the weight of constant worry in his expression. He checked around to ensure no one was listening before speaking in a hushed tone. Bennett promised investors he'd raise property values by cleaning up the area, George whispered. And by cleaning up, he means getting rid of your ranch. He needs your land to complete the full development. The gate? It's just step one. He's trying to pressure you into selling. He's pulled this same stunt in other neighborhoods, he whispered. First they limit access, then, suddenly, you'll start getting mystery code violations. After that, water issues. He'll make your daily life so unbearable that selling seems like the only way out. His warning settled heavily in my chest. I thanked him, though dread churned inside me. When I later asked Maxwell for the official documents verifying my easement, he brushed me off with that dismissive confidence he seemed to rehearse. "They're under review," he said, waving a hand like it was all routine. "Our legal team is evaluating outdated easement claims under the community's updated security standards. We'll sort things out eventually." The message was obvious. He was stalling and buying time while he pushed construction forward at full speed. Driving home, my headlights washed over the empty road, and an uncomfortable truth settled in my gut. I was being cornered by people with deep pockets, heavy influence, and no hesitation about steamrolling anyone who stood in their way. I paced my kitchen for several minutes before calling Olivia Wynne, a real estate attorney I knew from college. Even at the late hour, she answered quickly. As I explained everything, I found myself glancing out the window repeatedly, almost expecting to see bulldozers rolling toward my driveway. Olivia listened, typing in the background as she absorbed every detail. "Ethan," she finally said, "HOAs can be vicious, but they cannot ignore a properly recorded easement. That's not something they can vote away." Her keyboard clattered in the background. "First thing tomorrow, get a certified copy of your easement from the county registry. If it's formally recorded, they have no authority to block your access." But a broken bar, brace yourself. These battles can drag on for months and cost a small fortune. Her honesty didn't exactly comfort me, but it at least gave me a path. "What about tomorrow morning?" "They're starting construction," I asked, pressure tightening my chest. "Can we get an emergency injunction?" Olivia exhaled slowly. "Injunctions aren't instant. Even in emergency situations, you're looking at days or sometimes weeks. Document everything, every conversation, every notice, every photo. And if they trap you on your own land with no way out, call the sheriff immediately. That crosses into unlawful detainment." We talked strategy for nearly half an hour. By the time I hung up, the night was already slipping into early morning. Before trying to sleep, I grabbed a flashlight and walked down my long driveway to the main road. And there it was. Bright orange flags, fresh stakes hammered into the soil, spray-painted lines marking where the fence and gate would rise. They hadn't just planned these, they'd prepared it well in advance. I barely slept. I thought I still had a few days to fight back, but at dawn, the unmistakable beep, a broken bar beep of heavy machinery jolted me upright. I threw on my clothes and bolted outside. At the end of my drive, a construction crew was already raising an 8-foot metal barricade across my access road. Workers anchored steel posts into deep concrete wells while a massive excavator tore into the earth. The fence stretched far beyond the gate, out completely sealing off my only route. I stormed toward the workers, demanding to speak to whoever was responsible, but they simply shook their heads. "Orders from the HOA," one said, not meeting my eyes. "We're just here to build." Other residents chimed in, fed up with paying 2 tolls to drive home. Media gets involved soon after. Zoe Sullivan from the Austin Chronicle reached out. She wanted to cover what she called the toll road war. I invited her to the ranch. I showed her the easement documents, the survey, the footage, everything. I didn't start this. I told her, I just want the access I've had for decades, but if they're going to charge me to cross their land, I have every right to reciprocate. Her article dropped that Sunday and exploded online. Thousands of comments, shares, and messages poured in. People across the country who'd been burned by HOAs rallied behind me. Local TV stations picked up the story. Camera crews came by. Soon, folks were driving out just to snap photos with the toll booth like it was some bizarre roadside attraction. Maxwell goes too far. All that public attention should have forced Maxwell to back down, but instead, he went full villain. At around 2 a.m. one Tuesday night, my security system recorded Maxwell, William Davis, and a third man creeping up to the booth with tools and spray paint. The footage caught everything. A sense Maxwell smashing the payment terminal. A sense someone spray painting over the cameras. A sense another man trying to tear down the barrier arm. What they didn't realize was that I had installed hidden backup cameras in places no one would expect. While they disabled the obvious ones, the backups filmed every angle and uploaded the footage to the cloud in real time. I called the police immediately and filed charges for property damage and trespassing. The images were crystal clear. Maxwell's face front and center as he vandalized my equipment. Of course, when questioned later, Maxwell denied everything. He claimed I staged the entire thing to make him look bad, but the digital timestamps, cloud backups, and the clarity of the footage told a very different story. Ryan and I rebuilt the booth the next day and upgraded it. Steel reinforcements, more sensors, alarms, surveillance that even a raccoon couldn't sneak past. Special crossing rate for Maxwell Bennett, $1,000 per entry. Then I published the vandalism footage across social platforms and local community groups. The response was explosive. Within hours, residents were circulating the video in neighborhood chats, tagging one another, and expressing disbelief at the HOA president's behavior. The embarrassment for Maxwell and the entire HOA board was immediate and unavoidable. The HOA hastily convened yet another emergency gathering. According to what Frank later relayed to me, the atmosphere was electric with outrage. Residents were furious and not at me, but at Maxwell. They accused him of jeopardizing the entire community. One resident shouted over the noise, "You've put all of us at risk of a lawsuit. What kind of leader vandalizes private property on camera? What did you think was going to happen?" While the neighborhood fractured under the weight of the scandal, I kept digging into Maxwell's background. Using public records, connections in the real estate world, and a few well-placed inquiries, I uncovered the truth he had carefully concealed. Maxwell maintained a secret financial arrangement with Platinum Ridge Developments, the corporation behind the proposed Golden Meadows expansion. He wasn't simply an HOA president encouraging progress. He was personally profiting from pushing me out. Heavy commissions, performance incentives, and private bonuses were all tied to eliminating my easement and clearing the development path. This was not disclosed to the HOA. It should have been. Worse, I found that he had deliberately hidden my easement rights from the HOA board. When presenting the gate installation, he framed it as a routine neighborhood security upgrade, instead of the coercive tactic it truly was. Olivia's legal digging went even deeper as she unearthed documents proving Maxwell falsified the original fence permit. The submitted layout did not match the actual gate's location and conveniently omitted any mention of established easements that could slow their plans or trigger county scrutiny. Then came the final confirmation, a leaked email from a Golden Meadows resident. In it, Maxwell openly admitted that his strategy was to choke off my access until I caved. He wrote, "Once Morgan realizes he can't get in and out without our permission, he'll have to sell. The temporary inconvenience to residents will be worth it when property values jump 30% after development." He had just placed the final nail in his own coffin. With every piece of the puzzle assembled, I prepared to move but chose to give Maxwell one last opportunity to show his true nature. I sent a formal invitation requesting a peace negotiation at Olivia's office. Surprisingly, he agreed. Perhaps he believed that a law office setting would intimidate me. I arrived early, ensuring our preparation was flawless. The recording setup was discreet and entirely legal. Olivia served as both host and witness, and the room carried a clearly posted notice that recordings might occur. Texas law only required one-party consent, which we already had. Maxwell arrived 15 minutes late, a smug display meant to assert dominance. He brought William Davis, his high-priced attorney, both the men dressed like they had stepped out of a luxury catalog. During the meeting, I presented a simple, reasonable proposal. I would dismantle the toll booth and drop every charge provided the HOA removed their gate and put my easement rights into writing, irrevocably and permanently. This restores the conditions we all lived with peacefully for years, I explained. No tolls, no barriers, no legal battles. Maxwell's arrogance surged immediately. He leaned forward, adopting that patronizing tone he favored when speaking to people he assumed he outweighed. Mr. Morgan, you severely misjudge your position. The HOA has deeper pockets, more influence, and more time. We can keep this tied up in litigation for as long as necessary. You'll drown in expenses long before we feel any actual strain. Believing himself untouchable, he continued talking, revealing far more than he intended. He bragged openly about manipulating the HOA board, calling them gullible and bragging that they voted based solely on his direction. He celebrated his development deals and described his plan to force me into selling. This project moves forward either way, he said. You can cooperate and cash out now, or you can fight her and destroy yourself financially. He had no idea every word was being recorded. The next morning, I unleashed everything: the vandalism footage, the leaked emails, the falsified permit documents, the proof of his undisclosed commissions, and finally, the full recording of our meeting, complete with his admissions, threats, and insults. I sent the package to every homeowner in Golden Meadows, posted it on social media, and handed it directly to Zoe at the Chronicle. She wrote a devastating expose copyright detailing the entire saga, including Maxwell's financial arrangements, his deception of residents, and his attempts to pressure me illegally. Larger media outlets quickly picked it up, and the story spread across the state. The whole board exploded with panic. They called an emergency session where multiple members demanded Maxwell's immediate removal. The room devolved into shouting, accusations, and furious residents demanding accountability. Maxwell attempted to claim the recordings were edited and the evidence fabricated, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Patricia, usually loud and confrontational, sat silent beside him, her eyes darting around as though calculating the safest exit path. Within the week, Maxwell was expelled from his position, stripped of authority, and left facing civil action from me alongside potential criminal charges that were beginning to loom over him. The vandalism charges became the final blow that unraveled everything the old HOA leadership had tried to hide. William Davis slipped out of his position as HOA counsel without protest, no doubt realizing that being caught on a recording while involved in suspicious, possible criminal behavior was a disaster he couldn't repair. With the previous leadership collapsing, the newly formed HOA board stepped in under the temporary direction of Nancy Fletcher. They wasted no time addressing the chaos. Their first unanimous decision was to tear down the gate entirely and officially reaffirm my permanent easement in a formal, legally binding agreement, exactly what should have been honored from the start. They also agreed to pay for the damage done to my toll booth and cover the full cost of my legal battle. Platinum Ridge Developments pulled out of the Golden Meadows Estates project immediately after the scandal broke. The developers wanted nothing to do with the negative attention. The land they abandoned was later purchased by a conservation trust and preserved as protected natural space, which allowed the community to maintain the rustic charm that had drawn many of us there in the first place. Maxwell made one last desperate attempt to retaliate by filing a defamation lawsuit against me, but the court dismissed it instantly. He couldn't prove that a single word of the evidence I had shared was false. Meanwhile, the vandalism case concluded with plea agreements that included community service and financial restitution for those involved. When I totaled the toll booth earnings of more than $15,000, I decided not to keep a dime. Instead, I used it to create a land rights defense fund to support anyone else being bullied or pressured by an HOA the way I had been. The irony was almost poetic. Maxwell's attempt to force money out of me had ended up producing a resource dedicated to helping people stand up to people like him. Once peace was restored, I hosted a massive barbecue on my ranch and invited the entire Golden Meadows neighborhood, everyone except Maxwell, and even welcomed local journalists who had followed the story closely. The event turned into a celebration of unity, relief, and renewed trust within the community. Many neighbors admitted how grateful they were that the toll booth saga had ended and that the tension finally lifted. During the gathering, I announced something I had been planning quietly for months. I intended to expand the ranch into a community-focused agricultural education center. I wanted to turn the land into a place where neighbors could grow, learn, and build together. I reminded everyone that this land was never meant to divide people, it was meant to be shared. Frank and Eleanor Hamilton were the first to volunteer their support. Frank offered to teach children the basics of electronics, showing them how to create simple circuits and solar-powered devices. Eleanor planned to run gardening workshops and teach sustainable growing methods. Soon more neighbors stepped forward, offering skills, time, and enthusiasm. What began as hostility had transformed into collaboration. A year later, the ranch had become a lively community destination. We hosted gardening lessons, weekend farmers markets, hands-on workshops in agricultural automation, and family events. Local school groups visited regularly, and the university's agricultural extension program even partnered with us for research and field studies. As for Maxwell, he eventually sold his home and moved away after becoming fully isolated by the community. In the spot where the toll booth once stood, I installed a small sign that read, "Never